Hello, welcome everyone to Rev Up Revenue Strategies for Better Sales Onboarding, a webinar presented by Litmos. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to join us from wherever you are in the world. Speaking of which, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, tell us where you're signing in from. We're really excited to get this conversation going. But while we wait for attendees to trickle in, I just wanted to start with a few housekeeping notes. So all webinar attendees will be able to interact with each other in the chat window to your right. You'll also notice a Q&A widget right below the chat one. You can use that Q&A window to send us questions throughout the presentation, and myself and the rest of the Litmos team will do our best to respond to as many questions as we can in real time. But we'll also be saving some of your questions for the Q&A portion, which will happen in the last 15 minutes of the webinar. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, I'd like to hand it over to our Chief Revenue Officer, Jeff Griggs, and our Director of Global Talent, Pam Ramsbott. So without further ado, take it away.
Thank you, Liz. By purpose of introduction, my name is Jeff Griggs. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at Litmos. And the focus for this conversation today is really around a lot of learnings from my perspective over a long time of managing salespeople and revenue teams. And having done that at major companies and organizations, as large as Salesforce and Oracle, all the way down to very hyper growth companies and great companies like Litmos. And really what we've learned from that, and really how enablement, I would say, changes the outcomes of the organizations I've worked with. And with that said, I'll pass this over to Pam.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. I'm Pam Ramsbott, Director of Global Talent Management at Litmos, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm coming from the people side of the house. I've often partnered with folks within the sales organization to onboard and train and ramp sales organizations. And I think there's a lot of benefits to collaboration and that true partnership for fantastic enablement outcomes. So really happy to be here with all of you and with Jeff to chat about this important topic. So just a bit of our agenda. We just did our introductions. We'll do some chatting about onboarding benefits and challenges, assessing and addressing new hire strengths and gaps. We'll talk about that cross-functional alignment, which is incredibly important to the success of these programs, and leveraging tools. And then, as Liz mentioned, we'll have some time for Q&A. So hopefully you'll feel engaged and motivated. We've got some poll questions, and we'd love to hear from you. We have some experience here to share, and we'd also love for you to share your experience and share with each other. So thanks for being here today. So we're going to just kick off with a few stats because, don't we love stats when it comes to enablement? So Labor Max Staffing estimates a savings of $192,000 in 2022 for time saved onboarding and training new employees. Like, who wouldn't want that? We also have a stat here. Organizations with a standard onboarding process experience 54% greater new hire productivity. And those are pretty compelling. Oh, I love the hearts. Yeah, bring it on. Hearts, hearts, hearts. Feel free to use those emojis. What other stats do we have here when we talk about onboarding investment? There's a big why component. This is it takes a lot of time, as we'll talk about. It's costly. So why do we do this? We see great results when we invest here. So sales onboarding can improve win rates by 14% and quota attainment by 6.6%. And we also see the retention improvement. So great onboarding can improve employee retention by 82%. Again, incredibly compelling. So what does that mean for all of y'all out there? I think we've got a poll question here that we want to learn a bit about you, how you're doing this. So what elements of your enablement strategy do you think contributed to quota attainment throughout the onboarding process? And there's some ideas we have and some ideas we've seen successful. But if there's something other, we'd love to hear from you. Put it in the chat if there's something that's not represented here that really contributed to your quota attainment. Ooh. Oh, I see. My very favorite, manager coaching. You might hear me say it a few times today. Oh, these are great. Any others out there? Please type them in the chat. Love to address them. Jeff, what do you think of these stats here?
I actually love these. I'll tell you right now, the one that I love to see trending up, and I know you love the manager training, but the continuous training for me is one that I think all sales reps will tell you, and a lot of the people in the revenue team will tell you, well, I've been here 3 years, I don't need any more training. And I think we all know that that's usually not the case, and that understanding that continuous training does have a huge impact. It's not just the onboarding. We'll talk a lot about that today, but that continuous training mantra within an organization, I think, is key to success. And certainly when you're talking about those outcomes you just highlighted, absolutely key to that. It's the quota attainment, it's the productivity, it's certainly the rep enablement, it's anybody that touches revenue and how fast that they can get up to speed and retain the things they've learned, and then ultimately how do you continually train them on that. And that's really unique, and certainly the companies that do that and solve for that, they have great success.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next slide. Super. Okay. So onboarding challenges, certainly it's an investment. And with that investment comes some challenges. So we're just going to chat through a few that we hear about often in our roles. And Jeff, I'll have you chat through, like, what do you think about ownership of onboarding for new sellers?
So I think the ownership piece is probably where you need to build the foundation, right? You have to say who owns it and who's going to contribute to it. And in many organizations I've worked in, we have a theory or philosophy around extreme ownership. Many of you have probably read the book from Jocko, the Navy SEAL, but it really focuses on you as the leader are responsible for owning and developing a plan for learning and continual learning. So from my perspective, I've always seen that the managers that have the buy-in and the understanding that they're the owners of that, and they are the ones that are going to contribute to the people team or the enablement team or the L&D teams on what they want to see out of the content or the training or the skills assessments, whatever they're doing. They're giving their buy-in and they're owning that, and they're actually owning the outcomes, and they're willing to take on some of those metrics we showed earlier, which are they're the ones who will change the metrics, the productivity, and the quota attainment. So it all starts with ownership there, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah, that the manager plays a very, very important role in the success of the programming and the success of the sales team. I think, from an ownership perspective, when we talk about the content that is used for onboarding, or maybe the tools that are used for onboarding, that's where that partnership with your people organization, your learning and development team, those partnerships and co-ownership of some of the training itself is incredibly important. And I think when you have that strong relationship, you can feel that sense of co-ownership for the overall programming and outcomes. Mm-hmm. And how about the time? Oftentimes I get the call, can you train my person in, an hour? So what do you think about time, both the investment of time to create all of the material to onboard new folks, as well as, maybe the month or two it takes, maybe longer, to ramp somebody into a role effectively? And I see all the tears. Everybody on the call has had that call. 5 minutes, please. Train them everything they need to know.
So I love this conversation, right? Because there is always the conversation of, I don't have time, the rep doesn't have time, the partner person doesn't have time. But the reality is, it's the amount of investment you make here that gets the result of the outcome you want. So when I think about time investment, I think about it kind of in two buckets, right? It's the actual manager in partnership with the people team or the enablement team on creating the content, creating the right ways that learners need to either be certified or trained or made to understand, new enhancements in a product or whatever that's going to be. So that partnership has to happen there. But it's also from the actual user. It's the sales rep or the CSM, anybody that touches revenue in the organization, wanting to personally invest their time in learning and their time in understanding why it's important to understand. what has changed, what tools are different, what the market demands are. All of those things are a continual loop of learning. And if they just think that they got their onboarding training and then all of a sudden, Pam, are going to teach them in 5 minutes to know everything that's changed in the last 2 years, it's not realistic. They have to understand they personally have to make that investment in time, and they have to be a continual learner. And in whatever capacity they learn, they need to identify that. And then they make that request to their manager, and then ultimately the team's partner to get that.
Yeah. I hear a lot of sort of intrinsic motivation. So you're hoping you've got the programming that you put in place and things that are, structured and assigned. And then, you're hoping to build a culture where your sellers know that it's their responsibility to continually update and refresh their own learning so that they can be the most effective salesperson out there.
Yep.
Yeah. Great. Next up, we have time to proficiency. And we touched on this a little bit. This is where I think it gets tricky sometimes, where you might have some folks feel like they can be ready to go in a week. Maybe they've come in with some experience, or they're not brand new to sales. They've been in sales a while. How do we think about how long does it really take to ramp a new salesperson and make sure that they're able to be effective after that onboarding training?
It's a great question. Everybody's different. I don't want to be the consultant here and answer, it depends, right? That's the typical consultant answer. But what I would tell you is that when we look at even hiring sales reps, there's kind of 3 buckets we always look at, which are, what does this person know about the industry? Do they come from the industry? Mm-hmm. So that level of proficiency they have to have, or you have to train them around that proficiency. Mm-hmm. Do they have real business acumen and that proficiency to, go out and talk ROI and have an executive presence? And then ultimately, then are they a sales, person by nature? Have they been selling for many, many years and know Sandler, know Challenger, know all the methodologies? So that time of proficiency depends on all of that. And what we try and do is very early on, especially when you hire, is identifying those skills gaps or those behavioral gaps mm-hmm. that an individual may have. And we'll talk more about that later, but it takes you can't just take the usual, it's going to take us 6 months to ramp a new rep. Mm-hmm. And when we do that and we take that very arbitrary number and we don't think about the individual learners or their skills or their behaviors before they came in, we're not capable of getting them the right learning capabilities or right tools to make them successful. So that time to proficiency is a very, very big aspect of this. And I'll even tell you, one of my favorite stories, I had a rep and she came in new hire training and had to do the video. Everybody knows that you got to do the video assessment around, can you do the first call deck really well? So she practiced for 24 hours and did 44 takes. Her husband thought she had lost her mind, but in all reality, she had to get to that level of proficiency in order to feel like she was comfortable. And guess what? 5 years later, she's at President's Club, 3 different times. So that's the type of proficiency and time and investment somebody makes around, all the things we talked about around ownership and investment and now that proficiency level.
Yeah, it's variable is what I hear. And the onboarding might need to be tailored rather based on who's coming into your organization, what type of experience have they already had in this particular role or industry. And I see here the stat 38 days on average, which is, a nice to have from somebody who's planning the program and the upwards of $9,000+. It's a lot more expensive to hire somebody new, which, from the people side of the house, we often say, let's invest in folks and make sure they have the proper training so that they have the confidence to go out and be excellent at this job. So we don't have to go back out and find another person if this role is not a fit. So I love that initial investment and really investing the time. Buy-in, we touched on a little bit. Anything to add there? We did talk about some of more experienced folks coming on board and saying, I don't really need the training. I've already been in this role before. What do you say to that?
I always usually give them a little bit of a quiz on what's changed in the market and what's changed with the product and ultimately what tools have changed. We'll talk about tools here in a second, but I usually go down that path because A lot of times a sales rep believes that they don't need to do or recertify or retrain or do the things that somebody would normally be looking at as when they onboarded. That buy-in is very important, because what has happened is there are reps that have done deals that have done different things that have contributed to them being able to close in a different, either vertical or a different segment, whatever that may be, that are definite learning things that an individual and a sales rep specifically should be wanting to consume. They should be wanting to hear the latest and greatest technique, things like strip lining, things like, cleaning your plate. These are all methodologies that people use, and they use them in different ways and in capacities that it just makes you good, better, not always the best, but you want to be achieving always to be that best person at that. And if you want to be the top sales rep and you want to be the one that wins every year, then you really have to get that buy-in.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good. I like to put folks like that on the stage and be trainers to others, folks that really have had the experience, feel like they are, capable and have the skills. Let them demonstrate for others. And really tailor what's, what can be additive for them. We can make sure that they're not doing the basics, they're not doing the entry level things, but we're really tailoring the experience that meets their skill level. Yeah. Okay, super. I'm sure there are many more challenges out there, but we'll move on to some other aspects of this work. So yeah, this is an all important question. Like, how do we know we've got the right folks in the seat, so to speak? And there are a couple things we think about. Jeff, I'll let you talk about interviewing for sales skills in particular.
Sure. So I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I look at those three buckets again. Are they from the industry? Do they have the business acumen, and do they have the understanding of how to close deals and run a sales cycle? So when you interview an individual, you always have to think, or I always think in those three buckets. And I think about, okay, if they're not from the industry, what skills do they have that are compatible, or what skills can we retrain or reskill them on, so that it makes them capable of understanding what they should know about the industry. And when I think about that interview process, I think about, do we have that course or that enablement in our framework for a new hire or onboarding? And if we don't, I have to think about, how do I partner, with Pam and, the people organization to make sure that we have that, especially if we're going to go out and we're going to say, listen, we're going to be hyper-focused on hiring people that have a skill around AI. Well, guess what? There's still a limited group of sellers out there in this, world that know AI. So you're going to have to say, I'm going to interview somebody. They may not have AI, but do they have skills that I can enable? And can I train them? Or are there adjacent skills that I can get for them in the interview process? And then I say, are they capable, again, to that third bucket of, being a real salesperson? Were they, sales trained with a methodology? And if they aren't, then you look at, really a racing model. We'll talk about this a little bit later too, around what are the behaviors an individual has, the skills they have, and then the ultimate measurement that we always have in sales is around the outcomes, right? Did they generate enough pipeline? Did they close enough deals? Did they hit their quota? Those types of things. But what you're really looking for in the assessment of an individual's skills is, do they have those behaviors? Do they have those skills that are adjacent? And can they be capable of learning something new? And through that, I kind of go into the behavioral questions. I ask a lot of times around, tell me, a deal that you lost. Tell me about what you did in an interaction where, somebody, either a legal team didn't work in the way that you wanted them to work with you, or the customer, ghosted you, or whatever that was. Tell me about how you behaviorally acted in that environment and what you would change. And you can learn a lot about an individual in the interviewing process about how they answer these things. And, I laugh, because it's happened quite a few times. You'll have the person that says, I've never lost a deal. Been a President's Club every single year. And you just sit back and you think, there's no way that is the actual fact, because there's so many things that go into closing deals, moving pipeline forward, getting to an executive sponsor, an executive buyer, economic buyer, all these things that you do in a normal sales cycle, that the more understanding a person has of their skills and their capabilities when you're assessing them in an interview process, it tends to allow you to be much more focused on how you're going to train them when they come forward. And I would tell you that just over time, I've learned that unless you're asking those type of questions, you don't know that behavior, professionalism, their ability to work well with others, cross-functional line of business interactions, all those things. And all of a sudden you get somebody in and you're like, wow, that individual's behaviors do not map to the culture that we really want to have at this company. They may have been a great seller, but their behaviors just don't map. So you have to ask all those questions, and you have to be very prescriptive in how you do that. And that does then lead to, again, identifying those gaps in that RACI model for skills and behaviors that then lend to outcomes. If you don't do that, you're really missing an opportunity to get the right hires. But I'll let Pam, you can talk to the assessments and certainly the simulations that you certainly do on the people side.
For sure. Yeah. I love that comment, Jeff, though, like really kind of assessing for growth mindset for that learner, lifelong learner out there, somebody who might have the capabilities in terms of methodology, but really wants to grow and continually develop. You can kind of tease that out a bit in the interviewing process and understand, what their willingness is to grow and learn with those questions. Also thinking about assessments and simulations. So this is another way to assess during the interviewing process. Sometimes folks do it, early on, but you can kind of do it in those final stages also, assessing for specific capabilities, providing your new sales folks with case studies, and then having them come in and actually do a full-on presentation or a demo simulation. Those are, a little bit more work on that candidate's part and a little bit more work on your part to actually create those. But then you'll have a very solid sense of their capabilities in terms of presentation skills, executive presence, some of the key areas you might be looking for. And you can really craft your assessment and simulations based on what you're looking to hire. But it really does give you more information about that candidate during that interviewing process. So hopefully you can make the best hiring decision possible for yourself and for your organization.
Yeah, and Pam, I would agree with that. One of the most successful hiring and track records I've had at an organization was we had the same case study. And every person that interviewed had to read the case study, had to interpret what they took from that case study, and then come back and tell the interviewing committee team on what they thought of that case study. And of course, the interview team had a list of answers that, we were kind of looking for, but you would find these hidden gems of people who were very analytical and could understand different things or had different ways of looking at that case study. Yeah. And that led to very high retention and very high outcome. Yeah. So that case study and assessment capability is very important.
Yeah. I love that consistency that you use the same case study and really, kind of helps with that inter-rater reliability as well if you've got some things that you're listening for through that process. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm. So you will all learn that I'm very process oriented, and I love nothing greater than to have a standardized process in place around how you looking at new hire strengths and their gaps. And I talked a lot about what that means as far as roles and responsibilities as well. So not only do I map out the skills or the behaviors or the gaps that they have before onboarding, I look at what the roles and responsibilities are going to be of an individual that we hire inside of a revenue organization and what they have to do every single day. So if you look at the matrix here, it talks across the top really about what the stages are that we have inside of a normal sales process. And then it breaks down by each functional role what a person is responsible for doing. And it gets very specific. Here at Litmos, we call it the gold standard. I've done this at multiple companies, and it works brilliantly to have this methodology in place so that everybody understands at each stage and at each progression of a stage, every single person in the organization has a role to play. And in that RACI model, it can be just as simple as awareness. We're making, the legal team aware that we got a vendor of choice and they're about to get, the NDAs and agreements from the company that we got the vendor of choice at. So get ready, because in stage 4, it's coming your way. It could be as much as, when do you do demos with the pre-sales team? And when do you engage with them? And, how important are things like discovery inside of, a deal process, and who's responsible for that? And what does that discovery document look like? What does the pre-sales person do? What does the salesperson do? What does the services person do that's going to do the implementation? Especially if you're selling a SaaS solution, there's just multiple players inside of that require the ability to understand that. And again, when you go back to on hiring and training and enablement, when you take an individual and you really hyper focus in on what those things are that they may be gapped at, you can address those, especially when you're looking at what the racing model is for stage and deal progression. So therefore, if somebody isn't that great of a challenger seller at getting, or they're not as good of a challenger seller, they're more of a hard worker, then you can identify inside of their hiring process that gap. And then you can say in a stage, in a deal cycle, listen, let me help you challenge more what the IT director said. Let me help you as a coach or a mentor, or as a manager, help you get to lines of business that you don't have access to. And being able to identify that and understand that with an overlay of a process is huge. And of course, we're going to make this available to everybody. And I'm happy that we're making that available after this call. But it really is the way that you are going to map out and understand really what a sales cycle looks like, and what the proficiencies of the salespeople are, and what the requirements are of everybody in the organization to align to that.
Jeff, I just want to commend you for this process, and coming from the learning and development and people side of the house. When there is no process and there are no expectations, it's really challenging to build learning and to assess whether your learning, actually the learning intervention works. And so having this kind of rigor around a process and very detailed goals and expectations for what you want people to know and do helps the learning and development organization effectively build the training, effectively assess your new seller capabilities post-training. And then it really does help your manager and ongoing coaching how to continuously improve those capabilities and skills. So they really do go hand in hand. We can't really build training out of the sky and say, we think they need to be able to do this. We have to have that partnership with our sales organization, so we know what you are holding people accountable to do, and at what level. And so those are really helpful factors in our building process. Mm-hmm. So next step here, thanks for sharing that, Jeff, really ties nicely into that cross-functional alignment. We can't do this really without each other. I think that, from the learning and development organization or people team or enablement team, however your organization is structured, there's a handful of folks that have capabilities around building learning programs, around assessing learning programs, around using learning management system technology to effectively manage programs. And then we have our sales folks and our sales managers and our sales enablement teams that are really the subject matter experts in the space of sales. And so that alignment and coming together to marry those skills to build out the most effective program, when those two things are kind of in sync together, we can really do the best job enabling our sales teams. And so I can't really speak enough about when you have that relationship and you have that engagement and kind of mutual appreciation and understanding for each other's role, you can really do great things for your sales organization. And thankfully, we have that here.
Well, thank you, Pam. The only comment I would make here is that when you are aligned and you understand kind of the values and you understand the vision of the company and you understand each of the roles and what drives towards a revenue and an outcome for the organization, that alignment happens because you understand each group functionally has to operate cohesively together, or we can't get a deal done. It's that simple. The product team's got to build a product that the market wants. We've got to sell and position it and demo it the right way. And you're going to have to align around all of those different factors. And the racing model does help us do that, by the way. That helps us kind of show a buyer's journey and what a role that every person inside of an organization plays to get that cross-functional alignment, so that you're actually getting to the revenue goals. Because everybody knows at the end of the day, it's so much more fun when the company's growing and you're hitting numbers and everybody's super excited and everybody can attribute what they did in that cycle to the success of the company. And that only happens with alignment.
For sure. You triggered a memory for me. I remember years and years ago, I was in the learning and development organization of a very, very large company. And I was really trying to make the connection between like my purpose. What was my purpose of this, in this organization? And at the time I was working closely with the sales team, and I was building learning programs for our sales organization. And I kept, kind of noodling on this. And it occurred to me, wait a minute, when I do my job really well, and my goals are aligned with helping our sellers do their job really well, and our sellers are able to sell effectively, and we hit our revenue targets, like that means I was contributing to that. And it took a while, I don't know why, but it took a while for me to really make that connection. And, kind of when I got down on things and like, I don't really know what I'm doing, I put that hat back on and reminded myself, like, when I do this well and our sellers can sell, we're doing good things together for the organization. And it really does make a difference. So helping your learning organization and helping your trainers out there really understand like what they do to help our sales organization is incredibly important. And it does make the difference. And when you see those revenue targets, like, yay, cheer for them. They're making an impact on that too, just like the sales team is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next slide, please. And maybe, do we have a poll? Maybe. Do we have a poll in there? Oh, we do have a poll. Okay. All right, good. Thank you. Okay, so here's the poll question for you. How many times do you think someone should practice before presenting either a pitch or a demo, a presentation, anything someone has to practice? Okay. So we got some just wing it's out there. Who are you out there winging it? Let's see. We've got some 0 to 5, 5 to 9, 10 plus. All right. These are good. What did you say, Jeff, earlier? Your rep 45 times, 44?
Yes. And over a 24-hour period.
Okay. Oh, quick.
She really locked in. And I would tell you that and I know we're seeing a lot of the poll questions answered here. I would tell you that I would emphasize probably 10 plus times, but it doesn't always have to be in a row. Like that example that I gave you, it doesn't have to be back to back to back to back. Sure. What I've seen is the sales reps that go and present it, do it, get feedback on that, then probably listen to some calls, do some more enablement work, and then they go and practice it again. And then they listen more and they do more. And then they ultimately fine tune that over a period of time. And we all know, the Malcolm Gladwell, the 10,000 hours, just the more that you focus on getting that exactly right, the more capable you are when you're in front of a client or, a prospect, you're going to nail it. And I've always seen, again, the higher achieving sales reps, they are continually tweaking, practicing, and getting their pitch better and soliciting feedback from their peers. Your point on getting a rep on stage so that people can hear their story, it just makes a huge impact on people saying, wow, I want to be like that person. And I want to learn what they learned. I want to go practice that. And that's the continual learning they get. Yeah.
I think it's that, you kind of said it, like finding your own version. You hear the versions of others and you kind of take the things that, kind of really connect for you. And the more times you do it, you find your own voice so that when you are in a customer situation and maybe you're thrown off by a question or you're, kind of pivot in a different direction, you're confident in what you're saying. It's not memorized. You've really like built your own talk track that you feel confident with. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so I've seen lots of research out there. The one that is most recent is actually 10 plus times. I think a handful of years back, it was about 8 times. And now I've seen some new research that says 10 plus times. So we're going to talk a bit about some tools that might help you with that practice. Oftentimes, we expect people to kind of go on their own and maybe just practice on their own. Some folks do their own video recording and they listen to themselves back. Some folks find that to be really challenging to do. But at Litmos, we have part of our technology actually enables this, which is quite cool. It's not sometimes this technology is standalone, but it's really embedded into our platform, which is fantastic. And basically what that allows for is either the enablement team or the manager to put a challenge out there to a seller. So it might be a new product feature. It might be a new platform capability. It might be, it could be all kinds of things. And you send a challenge out to your sales folks. I need a 3-minute pitch on this particular new feature. And then the salesperson can go in and record themselves and send it back to the person who sent out that challenge and get direct feedback. And from what I've seen, a seller will actually do this between 8 and 10 times before they're even willing to send it back to their manager or to that enablement person, because they feel like, it wasn't quite right. I keep watching it over and over again, and I want to continue to do it so that it's really, quite good when I submit it for feedback. And so it's almost like an integrated practice because they want to make sure that it's ready to go before they send it to their folks for feedback. So we love the video assessment capability. It makes it super easy on your enablement folks and your managers. You don't have to schedule a meeting to do anything, over Teams or Zoom. You can do this kind of all electronically and record on your own. So love that video assessment capability. Jeff, have you used it? Have you seen it in action yet?
I have. I love it.
Yeah.
I absolutely think it's, any type of feedback on practice and any type of understanding of how you can be better. Again, good, better, never best, right? You are always practicing, and that's what I think that tool allows.
Yeah, for sure. The other feature I just want to touch on is the boost feature. And we talked a bit about that ongoing training. The boost feature allows you to send questions out following a training to keep that content fresh and top of mind. And then it guides the learner back to the actual content if they don't answer those questions correctly. So this is just, once again, a way to automate some of those spaced learning so it doesn't rely on a human always to check in or retrain. Our technology can help us reinforce the training with that spaced learning option, which is a really cool feature as well.
Awesome. And I think I'll touch on the next two here for us, Pam. Certainly on the flow of work. The way that sellers work today, and again, back to the continual learning, it's going to change over time. There's a whole bunch of AI tools that are embedded in, the products that we use now on, either CRMs or in recording, tools that, will transcribe what we heard. But the whole point there is you have to have the ability to be uninterrupted in what you're doing in the flow of work. You really have to understand that when you're in a process or a workflow, you have to really stay focused on that. And the multitasking, I've never seen anybody on a Zoom, typing an email at the same time. But I would tell you that is the type of challenge that the sellers have. And when you look at the right tools and you look at what's going to enable them, it really is contextually about giving the right information at the right time based on what workflow they're in. And certainly, when we talk about AI, like we did at the beginning, looking at content and giving the content that you learned or were trained on at the time that you're talking about a reference or an outcome that another company achieved. That is doing that in the context of a workflow. And the last thing that I'll talk about here, and this is just, there couldn't be a more perfect day for this to be talking about this, but our team, from a gamification perspective, we're right now doing a very creative objection handling gamification. It's one that I created a couple of years ago, and it's just called March Madness. And if we want to go to the next slide, I'll kind of give everybody what that looks like. When you make learning fun and you make it also a very good understanding of what people see in the field, or what objections to buying that they hear, you can gamify that into, and I've done it here with March Madness. So I have our sales reps go out and they pick their favorite, basketball team for March Madness. For those that are in Europe, they get to pick their favorite, football, soccer team. And then certainly we're a global organization. So, in Australia, they get to pick their rugby team, whatever that is. They pick their team, and then we bracket it just like we do for March Madness. And then what happens is you bring in all of the team members that touch revenue, whether that's SDRs or AEs or partner teams, and you put them all in a bracket. And the intention here is to have a lot of fun where they can represent their favorite team and they get asked questions that are common objections that they would hear in the field. And each person gets to voice how they would answer that. We give them a general objection handling sheet before we do it. So the reps can look at it and they can say, okay, generally this is how you would answer this question, but I need you to personalize it. I need you to think about what you would say or how you would respond to that objection. And each of the individuals then squares off on their bracket. I ask the question, I give them the persona of the person that's going to buy, and then each of them has 3 minutes to give their best answer. And then what happens is then we create a poll, and in that poll we say, okay, who do we think had the best answer against that objection? The person that wins that then progresses, just like the March Madness bracket, to the next level. But what we do is it's not a time to beat somebody up. It's actually a time of learning where people can learn how somebody responded to that objection in the best way, or they can use that little nugget themselves for the next one. So again, when you talk about people that say that they've been with a company for a long time selling and they can't learn anything else because they kind of know everything, this is a perfect format for them to get more learning. But what we do is we then give them feedback. Pam, I really loved your answer on this, this, and this. One thing you could think about, though, is if you gave this metric, this company that achieved that outcome, you could have added that to your pitch back. And the people that do that just absolutely love it. So we don't, again, use it as a time to make somebody feel bad or negatively impact what they said by putting them down. Instead, we use it as a learning environment where everybody is there to help you. And we even bring the RFP team in there to help people understand, these are some other things that you could add to your answer, because we get all these new questions. RFPs are constantly changing. So having that person on that call and helping with the feedback loop has been phenomenal. Yeah. And I'll tell you, there's a ton of fun that is had, doing this.
I hear it. I hear all the energy, and you've really integrated all the important parts into this process. Like they're practicing, they're getting on stage and delivering, they're getting feedback on very specific things they can make changes to. And it's all happening during this process. And I think it's a fantastic way to gamify training and to get people really excited and engaged about what they're learning. I did see a couple questions in the chat. Just maybe some tactical questions about it. How do you do it? Where do you do it? Is it a video submission? Do you bring everybody together? What's your process?
So we bring everybody onto Teams. So we bring everybody onto Teams at one time, and the process is we send out the objection handling document before. We have everybody pick their team, and then we have our enablement leader. She creates the brackets. People don't necessarily know who they're competing against. So it makes it even more fun. So once you get into the call, then boom, you found out who you're paired up against. And it can be an SC versus a rep versus an SDR. It can be anybody that touches, revenue. So you're going to get different answers from different people based on what that question is. Yeah. But the most important part is that you facilitate the feedback loop, which is pair everybody up, let them answer, and then give them the comments on what they did. And that's how we kind of run it over a Teams call.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Liz, are there any other questions around this that we should touch on now?
Yeah, this is actually kind of a perfect segue because we're coming up to the end of our presentation and into the Q&A section. So I think, yes, one of the questions was sort of about the logistics of the bracket, particularly how people square off, which Jeff, you just explained perfectly. I'm wondering if for folks who are asynchronous, if there's a way to do that asynchronously. Is that something that you think people could do without having a live call, or?
You absolutely can. So I'll give you an example. Yeah. So just because of time zones, some of the Australia folks, we just have them compete first, and we record it, and then we play it the next time everybody's on the call, and then everybody votes there. So you can do that based on time zones too. And sometimes there's conflicts, like somebody's on a customer call and they can't make it. So we will have them I'll record the question, they'll answer it back, and everybody votes on the next call.
Love it. Great. So I'll lob a few more questions at you. This one I think is a great general question that a lot of people can relate to. Sarah's asking, as a training developer, how can I encourage managers to take ownership?
Yeah, if you want me to answer first, Pam, I will happily answer this.
I'll jump in. I think it comes from two different directions. Like you as their manager have an opinion coming from the talent management space. Like I often think about manager expectations as a whole for the organization. So how do we expect our managers to show up? How do we expect them to behave as leaders within the organization? And having a criteria or some behaviors documented is always helpful, because again, if people don't know what is expected, they don't know what to do, and they don't know if they're doing it well. And so I'm a big believer in setting really clear expectations about what you think your managers should be doing and how they should be doing it. And when you have those in place, it helps with that training. So we can train our managers appropriately, we can enable them, and then we can give them feedback when it's not happening, because again, we've set those clear expectations. But that's more from the people side. I think, like Jeff, I'd love to hear from your perspective as the manager of the sales managers. How do you do this as a leader?
I usually put it in their MBO.
Yeah.
And I absolutely manage them to it and say that you have to have the understanding that to be successful in sales, we always have to be training and developing our sales teams. Therefore, part of their MBO and the way that they're compensated is going to be tied to that. And that then helps them to kind of, earlier in the discussion, the allotment of time and the extreme ownership that they need to have around this. And anytime somebody's pay is tied to it, it really drives behavior. So that's what I love to do.
I could not agree more. And also, like, strong leadership, you have to have that strong leadership that's going to hold folks accountable and is going to have the tough conversations when things aren't happening.
Absolutely. Thanks for those insights. So another question we have from Dave Betts. What's your thoughts on building talent profiles with partnerships with HR and recruiting to make sure that we hire the right competencies for shortening the ramp time? Jam-packed question.
A jam-packed question. Yeah. So I think that, in more mature organizations, this, hopefully is a really detailed process for every role out there. For maybe smaller organizations that are not quite in this direction, you still can do a good job partnering with your HR and recruiting team, having a strong relationship again with the stakeholders from sales or CX or like whatever functional area, and understanding what do you need for this role, understanding what are those specific skills that you're hiring for, the specific capabilities, and then formulating again the right either assessment process or behavioral interviewing questions. The more clear you can get on what you're hiring for in partnership with your functional partner, the better you're going to be able to hire for that role.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to this is that, and I'll be very specific on the sales aspect of this for the right profile for improving ramp time. You have to do the upfront homework to say the sales reps that are in place and that are successful now, what are the behaviors, the skills that they have that we're going to now go hire for? And what specific industries do they come from? What type of background do they come from? And you build that from a profile perspective. And we do that here using, again, I've got another process for that, using another racing model on behaviors and skills. And then that feeds the sourcing team and the hiring, people team to then go out and find those types of individuals. Then I know that my ramp time is going to be decreased because we've got, what would seem to be, in most cases, the right profile of the person we hire so that the ramp time is decreased.
That's really where those assessments and simulations can be helpful too, because hopefully you've done all of this upfront work, you've got the right candidate, and then you can kind of do a bit of a check, like how did they perform? Because it's one thing they've made it through the interview process, but then that last step of can they actually do the thing that they say they can do in the actual interviewing process?
Yeah, that's great. And I think so while we're talking about doing some upfront work and preparation, on the other side of things, we do have a question from Barbara about how to measure effectiveness after onboarding. How can you continuously measure success beyond just the short-term sort of vanity metrics like employee engagement, NPS, et cetera?
Yeah, I think and I'll let Pam, you can talk a higher level, but we'll talk kind of onboarding for sales reps. One of the key metrics I always look at is time to first deal, right? And that's how fast does this person come in, understand, the value and the solution selling that we are positioning, and how soon do they close a deal? And is that faster than most reps, or is it right on par? And I look at that from the perspective then of the reps that stay in seat. So performance metrics year over year show you, are they staying because you're enabling them and they want to stay with the company and grow and have that culture? And do they continue to want to be part of their company? If they aren't, you'll see a big trend where, okay, they're there for a year or 2 years and they leave. And that's one of the other metrics, kind of two of the metrics I really look at.
Yeah. Those are great ongoing metrics for measuring sales effectiveness and certainly hitting the numbers and all of those all important things. From the onboarding perspective, I love to do performance assessments week to week through the onboarding process. So I like to know, is the onboarding working, and are the sellers actually grasping the information from the training, and can they do the thing I hoped they could do when I'm building the training? So I always start off sort of week to week. What do I want them to know this week? And what do I want them to be able to do after this week? And then ending the week with actual assessment. So it might be, a general assessment where it's a knowledge assessment. But I often integrate performance assessments into every week of onboarding so that we can start the process of practicing and getting feedback really early on in their journey. And then you can actually assess whether or not what you train them on that week worked. Is it an effective training program? Can they do the thing you need them to be able to do? And so that's just how I think about evaluating, does the onboarding work? Is it effective?
Thank you for that. I think another question we have, which is a real simple one that came up at the beginning of our presentation. What's the name of the book that you all were discussing by Jocko Willink? For those who might want to check it out?
It's called Extreme Ownership.
Extreme Ownership. Awesome. So keep that in mind, folks. And this is also a good reminder to check the resources window in your console, because you have a few different resources, including a PDF of the RASI chart and the March Madness bracket that Jeff discussed. Okay, so I think we have time for one more question. Let's see. Oh, this is a good one. This one is also from Barbara. I get that we need to reinforce key learnings with practice and simulations, but how can we ensure long-term retention while also keeping training content up to date in the fast-paced industries where information quickly becomes outdated, like SaaS?
That's a good question.
It's a great question from Barbara. So what I would say is we've gotten really good at fine-tuning the recordings of sales reps and the pitches that they do that resonated on deals that we won. And what I would tell you is that in every deal that we are on, and it could go back to a couple weeks or 3 months, there's a different question that a different prospective client asks that we don't know the answer to on that call. So either the rep or the SE in SaaS has to go back and figure that out and then come back and answer that question. So what I would tell you, the ability to keep people up to date and retain them so that they're articulate and able to answer questions that are coming out on the changing environment, you have to go back and listen to what the questions are that are most relevant in a very short amount of time. Because I can tell you, traditionally, we've had these big sales kickoffs once a year, train the reps, and then we think that they're going to not be impacted by iterative changes in the market or by other products or competitors along the way.
Yeah.
So therefore, you have to change and understand what the questions are, what the RFPs say. I talked about that earlier. And then ultimately what it is you're going to do on the recordings from others and the content that we answered back with so that they're better to do that. Pam, anything else for you?
Yeah, and I heard this recently at a conference and it really hit home. Like, I think from a learning and development professional, we like to make things beautiful. We like to make them very, very pretty, very helpful, very effective. And I think sometimes we have to kind of take that hat or put it in the back seat for things that just are, I need a quick training. I need a quick recording. I need, it doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles of something that's going to be around for a year. But if it's something I need to train on once, just, being okay with, it's not the most perfect or beautiful piece of training I've ever delivered, but it's going to get the job done. It's effective. So I think that's, how those of us maybe in the learning and development space can do things faster and quicker when there is just a rapid need that doesn't have to have a long-term shelf life.
Okay, well, unless anyone has anything else to add, I do think we are coming up toward the end of our presentation. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us and for your excellent questions and discussion in the chat. Thank you, Pam and Jeff, for joining us and providing such awesome insights. We hope that we were able to answer everybody's questions and get you excited about driving better revenue results with onboarding. Just a quick reminder, this presentation was recorded, so it will be made available to you via email with the email you registered with, so keep an eye on your inbox. And you can grab the slide deck of the presentation from the resources section in your webinar. So again, thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.